I have great pleasure in introducing Father Buckley, CC Cantor, who was a former curate of Carriganima, who will give us a lecture on the archaeological history of Carriganima. Afterwards, he will show us slides he took during his time in Carriganima. So, Father Buckley.
I'll talk from here now and hopefully I'll be heard. Anyway, thanks for asking me back to talk on a topic which in my later years here I enjoyed researching. And I'm thrilled to be a small element in all the celebrations, and from now on I'll say only what's necessary. I came here in May 1961 and I departed early in 1969. And my interest in this history of the parish, early history of the parish, began, I think, in 1966. It was the 50th anniversary of the Easter Rising. We had a meeting somewhere, I forget where, to honour the occasion. And as some of you might know, the late John Lucy read the 1916 proclamation after 11 o'clock Mass here in the village, possibly on Easter Sunday, 66. Anyway, Father Dan O'Connell, the present parish priest of Macroom, was parish priest here at the time, and he suggested that somebody should read a paper on that period of history. I was suggested, I'd say, but I had no ability or inclination to ever to learn Irish history. At school, I could never learn history, and I'd say I failed every history exam I ever did. And even now, the only dates I can recall would be 432, might be the Battle at Clontarf, and 1014, the arrival of St. Patrick. Anyway, to make a long story longer, I said I do a bit of research on prehistory, which would roughly be history BC. Now, for some reason, the monuments of that era, for me at least, had a sense of the mysterious, of awe, of genius, and of amazing survival. And one big regret I have about all this is that I hadn't more time to explore and research. And if ever I become PP, I only hope that I land here for a few years to continue the research and the interest. But the dice is a bit against me. Anyway, my subject tonight could well be called A Look at the Very Ancient Field Monuments of the Parish. They're very much in evidence, and the pity is that we take them for granted. And secondly, that for a lot of us, well, for some of us, they are in the way of progress and farming, and so we bulldoze them out of the way. If anybody is interested in figures, the area of the parish is about 36 square miles, roughly 23,000 odd acres. Clondrohead has exactly 9,333 acres, which is about 40.5 square miles. I hope nobody is good at maths now, listen to me. And Carriganima would be roughly something over 13,500 acres. Now, the biggest townland in the whole parish is Moulnahorna, which has 1,634, Coshlaura over 1,400, Glowndav nearly 1,400. At the other side of the parish, Mullinroo, Goran, Kilvoutra, Lissacrasig, they'd be the biggest. The smallest is the Glebe, 77 acres. Now the Glebe, you see, I suppose you could call it a townland because everywhere you had a vicar's residence, a Protestant minister's residence, and some few acres along with it was called the glebe. Now, I divide it up by saying I'll talk about monuments to the living, monuments to the dead, and ceremonial monuments. And to give you a rough idea of the monuments that were still there and put up for the living, you have forts, full-locked fields or cooking places, roads, field systems, Bolon stones, cup-marked stones. Now, these will be intertwining with ceremonial and monuments to the dead as well. One thing that would never strike us, there's a townland between here and Mill Street called Clohula, and the term Booley, Booley, that's another one of the monuments to the living that we can see. It was a movement of cattle from lower ground to higher pastures in season, in good weather. Now, cattle only, there's no talk of moving sheep or pigs or goats or anything else. That system of Booley died out in Ireland in early 1800s, but is found very much in old Irish literature. It is also found, and even at present, in the mountains of southern Asia, northwest Africa, like Algeria, southern Europe and Scandinavia. Some remains of these have been excavated, and they have found that there was one house which had one room, a fireplace. It was thatched with straw or rushes, and was repaired yearly. I suppose the word Booley, if anybody is or was good at Latin, comes from the word bovile, a cattle enclosure or a dairy. You also have a term bol in Agrenga, which would be a kind of a sunbyre, which again could well be a stone circle. Now, talking about, one second, I better, would you put out the light, please? We better move in for him anyway. There's plenty of room back here, Nadilo. Wouldn't you get a decent apple when you went about it? So that built, what I'm talking about, came from an area from around there, the Middle East and Egypt. Now, they came into Ireland two ways. They came along up here through Scotland and into the north of Ireland. They came along North Africa, up through Spain, and then into an area roughly between Castletownbere and no, that's usually their trick. Now, they also came along North Africa because we have a lot of the monuments that you'll find there as well. When they arrived in Ireland, they came in to an area roughly between Castletownbere and Landore, and up to the Blackwater, really up to Mill Street, Mallow area, up to really to the Blackwater. I don't know why they'd never crossed it a whole lot, but they built all huge areas of stone circles, gullons, burial places, so that general type now. They're the main concentrations of what I'm going to talk about. There's hardly any at all in East Cork, and very little also in North Cork. Now, that's roughly a map of the parish. You won't find, where are we? Up there on the right, I presume, is Mulnahona, then Cashlora, then to the left of that, oh God, I don't know how to, maybe Knockraheen, wherever. Now, I better move from that. Now, the first thing I want to talk about are forts. And you see, people wanted to live somewhere, and from what we can gather, forts were the earliest, more or less the earliest inhabited places of all. There's anything from 30 to 40,000 of them in Ireland alone. Now, the wall around the fort was either totally of stone, earth, or a mixture of earth and stone. And any ditch or fence bank around the fort that was made of earth has been washed away. You would hardly ever find it. Yeah, a mixture of earth and stone, you'll find maybe an outline of the stones, but 'tis of the stone forts. They're the major things that we'll see. Now, a fort was called a lis, a raw, coher, cashel, doon. Now, you have plenty of townlands in the parish, lis, raw, coher. Now, the raw itself was the bank around it, and the liss was the space inside. People who lived in forts or inside forts, now, they always lived in the, not underground, let's put it that way, overground. They were a kind of an elitist crowd. You know, the poor people hadn't forts at all. I suppose they couldn't get the organisation or the labour or anything else to put them up. And forts were inhabited, used for habitation, up to about 1600. Now, outside of the forts, you had field systems very near the forts, and they were there from about 5000 BC. You could only see them from aerial photography because they are washed away as well. All the low banks were washed away. They were very small and very square. Just to go on a bit. That's roughly what the house inside the fort looked like. More or less one room, more or less. Now, the smoke came out the door or came out a hole in the roof. And I suppose, like if you lived in it, you would have quite a smell of smoke from your clothes for quite a while. Now, that roughly was a house built inside a fort. Forts weren't always circular. You had some of them square, more of them oblong and rectangle and all the rest. But that's the general outline. You had one opening. The idea of the fort and the house inside it was to keep the cattle in and to keep predators out, wild animals and all the rest of it, and maybe people who were anxious to attack and all the rest of it. That was the outline of a fort, I'd say, that was excavated somewhere in Ballavone, Gutterahally or some place like that. That is a stone fort, maybe Clash-Maguire, certainly somewhere along that area in Clondrohid. Very well preserved. Look at that for a wall. I think we measured that was about 13.5 feet thick. Now, that was dry stonework. There's no mortar, no earth at all keeping it together. And it took some labour, some organising, some engineering to put that as it is or as it was. Now, what they wore, from what we know from the very early times, was there on the left, a lena that was worn by men and women next to the skin. Outside of that, you had a brot, a cloak with a hood in it to cover the head. Now, that yoke that looks like a hoe, that is a type of, I don't know if you've ever heard of the word griffon. Anybody ever did? Yes. I was only a very young fellow when I heard of it. Anyway, their idea or their ways of killing animals and maybe their enemies would be from a selection of what you can see there. Now, fire, of course, was a problem to create, but they did it, and they did it well. I'll be talking about that later. That's the outline of a Fólk Fia, which is the cooking place of the deer. And that was there now taken, I'd say, in Willie Reardon's field, and like every lot more of these monuments, they were bulldozed to create better land and more space and all the rest of it. All you will see is there, you know, if you pulled off the grass and the earth and the furze and all the rest of it, would be burnt stone. That would be basically it. You would never find bones or anything else, because I presume they were all picked up by the dogs after the cooking sessions. Now, one of these, a number of these have been excavated. That was excavated in a place called Drumbeg, down in Landore, just outside Landore. And I was an onlooker when that was being done. That's a truck that was excavated, lined with flagstones. It could hold quite a lot of water. It seeped in from a stream. You don't necessarily have to have a stream. It can seep in from wet ground as well. The water now to fill the truck. Just as I am on that, 70 gallons were boiled one day. No. That's the outline, roughly, of what one looked like, if you looked at it. Now, here you had a kind of a hut where the food the meat was prepared, and maybe the cook or whoever it was stay there. You see, all these places, in a way, were seasonal. They had hunting seasons and all the rest of it. It's again, military would use them for feeding their troops and all the rest. You can see a truck in there, a truck of water. Now, it was the cooking place of the deer, and it was never written anywhere in old Irish literature that anything else was cooked, but I presume wild boar and all the rest. Anyway, along the upper edge, along here, you had a line of flagstones. By the way, not alone was it a cooking place, a boiling place in here, but you had a roasting place here as well. Anyway, along here, they laid a line of kindling. On the kindling, they put a line of sandstone, small sandstones. Limestone wouldn't do. On top of the line of stones, they put another line of kindling. Then they got a light and lit one side, one end. It burned above and below the stones, gradually along the line, and according as the stones reddened, they were dropped into the water. I'll show you how they made light in a minute. But in Drownbeg, if I can get back to it, yeah, they boiled 70 gallons in 18 minutes, and they added 25 more extra, and they hadn't to add any extra red stones. It took 1 hour to heat the stones, and in one experiment 75 gallons were boiled in 15 minutes. A 10-pound leg of mutton was boiled in it. No, absolutely clean. Now they got the leg of mutton, they got rushes or reeds around the place, wrapped the rushes or the reeds around the leg of mutton, tied it securely and dropped it in. A 10 pounds leg of mutton was boiled in that place in 3 hours 40 minutes. They got the same result with the roasting spit. Oh. Now that's how they created fire. You got a piece of wood, and you got a second piece of wood, and you spun the top piece on the bottom. And when the tension and the heat began to increase, you got a bit of dry grass, and you threw it where the two pieces of wood met, and you started blowing, and you got fire. Now, during the last war, airmen, pilots, and so on were given that kind of education in case they were shot down over jungle territory or mountainous territory, so that they could make fire and survive. If you want to shout questions, do, This is a thing called a souterrain, a kind of an underground passage. They were usually found going from inside a fort to outside. They were also found totally outside of forts. Some people hold, of course, that some of these souterrains or underground passages go from one fort to another, or that if you got in, say here in Carriganima, into one of these, you could get out in Mill Street if you had good air conditioning and all the rest of it. But no underground passage was ever found linking two forts together. Now, some people would hold that they found it, but no researching, no archaeologists ever found one of these. They were a strange kind of a mixture. There were certain cavities or chambers set out in them. Butter was stored, grain was stored in these. The odd time people might have lived for a short while. The odd burial has been found as well. But you see, if the souterrain was kind of long, you had to have air ventilation shafts coming up from beneath the ground here and there. Now, that's a Bolon stone, simply a stone with a hole in it. They don't know why, possibly for grinding grain or herbs long ago. They all have been found facing the sky. In other words, no one has been found facing sideways. And they're very plentiful. Now, what's his name? What's his name? I forget. That's why I'm asking. Yeah. He's a man from Ardeen. Anyway, it doesn't matter. We discovered several now in that field when I called down there one day. Several of these Bologna stones. Now, you see, some are bigger than others, obviously. You have more, you see. Now, as I say, they were all facing the sky. Therefore, when it rained, the rainwater stayed in them. Now you had geniuses coming along who claimed that by dipping your finger into the water and rubbing it to your eyes to cure sore eyes, rub it to a pain in your wherever it is, and to cure your rheumatism, but the result was regarded as holy water. With the result again that people came along and put small stones, medals, rosary beads, scapulars and various things. In the course of time, the water became so holy that a saint was added onto the place. They certainly had vivid imaginations. Now, that one has a claim to fame, all right. That was taken, I forget from where, about 1840, and was placed outside Clanderhood graveyard. And it wasn't long at all before a hearse or a coffin going to that graveyard would have to follow a certain movement by way of ritual and go either inside it or around it. I forget where now. But that is there. I don't know where I got the date for it, but 1840 as far as I know. 1844. Now, related to that, in some vague way, would be cup-marked stones with a lot of holes in them. That's now was taken, I'd say, in the college in Cork in some corridor. It would be Stone Age, 6000 BC, and there's very little, if anything, known about them. They're very plentiful. To go back a minute to the souterrains or underground passages, they're found all over Ireland, Now, the roads, again, you see, you can only find the very old roads, or rather the remains of them, in bogs. And a road at that time, going back an awful long time ago, was, they'd be roughly from about 2000 BC, that type of road. You'll find them along the tops of ridges, by very old churches or forts. Now, you also had river fords and mountain passes, and you had roads, very narrow roads coming in from harbours. Again, these remains are found only in bogs. They put on kindling. Then they covered that, you see, with either wood, planks of wood, which made a road, or instead of the wood, they put stones, very likely cobblestones. That was another type of road. Now, I suppose the most common of all are the gallones. I don't know where am I? Am I in the... Anyway, we'll talk about gallones. These, they don't know why they were put up. They could be used for anything. They could be a marker between two areas. They could be the site of a burial. They could be a commemoration of a battle. They could be put up as a signal, say, to armies or whatever. They're different shapes and different sizes. I don't think that's in the parish. I don't know where I got it, but I'd say I photographed it for size. You have decorated stones, maybe as part of a religion or maybe for the sheer art of it. Now, you have one stone, you see, by way of a gallon for certain purposes. Now, you can have two stones in a line or more than 2. It's very unusual here that we have more than 2 in a lot of places. You know, it's really only 2. They're known as stone alignments. Give me his name. Ned, yeah. I was taken up in Cashlaura. Now, that's up in I'd say Clash Maguire, at the other side of Cabra, up on top of the brow there. Now, there's 1 stone down, maybe 2 stones down. But the different sizes of the stones you see would be very significant as well. And the researchers have found that they usually are aligned and orientated to some point on the horizon. So yeah. Now that's another one taken in my own place at home, which that's a huge one. You see, 2, 4, 5. I suppose to never dawn on you how these were quarried. See, they obviously came from some huge quarry, and the fellas working there, you see, they decided to cut out stones of particular sizes. What they did, they again put a line of kindling along, that was very handy, put a match to it, it burnt along and heated the rock face or whatever it was, and then when that was pretty well hot, they poured cold water over it, and then they, I suppose, had stone axes or wedges and eased it out like that. Well, easing isn't the word really, but it was known as a hot cold bash method. And it took some engineering and some organization to move these stones and their weight for quite distances, quite long distances. Now, that's another unusual collection, I think, Cabra, where you have 2 or 3 stones on the left in a line facing that pointer on the hill. You have 2 or 3 stones more down here sideways. That must have been a very important area long ago. You see the 3 of them there on the left pointing to that stone on the horizon. Again, an unusual combination near a cairn. Now, I suppose if we want to talk about the most important thing in the parish, it's that, is it in the parish? Knocknickilla. That very high stone or flagstone or stone furthest out, that is purposely pointing left or slanting left. It had what was known as it has a pointed top, as you can see, but that was covered with a rich metal. It's known as a basilisk finish. Now on the right, that was, I'd say, regarded as a god, and the smaller stones were regarded as semi-gods or demigods. That stone on the right, if you take a sighting on its slant, it points exactly to the point of the large stone away from us. Looking at it from here, you see the 2 here are the portals, and in every stone circle you have 2 portals, and opposite that you have a recumbent stone. I'll show you that later. But the outlier and the recumbent are outside the circle here. They're also outside the circle in Stonehenge in Wiltshire in the southwest of England. And that place has been programmed and computerized and all the rest of it, and it was found to have been a colossal astronomical observatory, I suppose around 6000 BC, where they could forecast eclipses of the sun and moon hundreds of years in advance. That's it from another angle. That's Dennis Connock, is it? Yeah. Well, now you can. That stone is, I think, is Argalan is something like, I'd say it is heading for 14 feet high. And then near it will give you an idea of its size in relation to it. Now you see, at either side of that stone here, you have a sundial on the right, which can tell you the time of the day with the shadow of the sun. There is another item on the left, which hasn't been sorted out at all. Now, there's one of the demigods and the main god, you see, and if you will shoot aside from the one on the left, it will hit exactly the point on the right. Now, I'm switching now to other stone circles in the place, and I'll only just flick over because there's an awful lot of them, and there's an awful lot of them that never have been found. I don't know if there are any locals in that slide. No, it's here. It's a Bantier crowd. They were out one Sunday. Now, that's a most... What's his name? He's a Clondrohan. Who? Is that? Anyway, take a look at those stones. Look the way they're quarried and polished and chiseled in and out. Every one of them. And if they were cleaned up, they'd look absolutely beautiful and really a work of art. Now, here near you, you have two portals. Facing you, you have a recumbent stone, and outside of that, you have an outlier. Now, standing here, looking out over the recumbent and the outlier, you come to a point on the horizon which could well be midsummer, now sunset or sunrise, midsummer, midwinter, or whatever it might be. That's now Knockraheen. The outlier there, the furthest out stone, if not all of those stones, were of quartz, which would glisten white in the sun when they were put up first. Now they have lost all their glisten, as you can see. I think that's somewhere now way up above Johnny Sullivan's place there. That's another one now, Johnny Sullivan there. There are several up there, I'd say, that nobody knows they exist at all. Now, that's Clahula. I think a place that has never been surveyed at all. And there's a massive amount of standing stones there in circles and all the rest. That's another look at it now. They're very bad slides because a lot of these slides, I'm sorry for apologising, like it was the first camera I ever had. The metering was pretty poor and it was only just sheer chance. Now that's Drumbeg. To the right of it over here, off the, well, you can see it in the distance, I'd say about halfway is on the right. Up on the right, you had the Fullock Fee that was excavated. Here you had a massive stone circle. If you look at it here now, the two ones nearest to you are the portals. You have the recumbent kind of lying down. Straight over that, you have a dip in the hill. That was midwinter sunset. Midwinter sunset. Now, if you take a look there, see the small one on the left? Ignore that. The next one then is a pretty hefty guy, and the next one is a slim one. The hefty chap was a god. The slim one was a goddess. And the people of that time, they offered rituals and sacrifices and prayers and all the rest for it was a kind of a fertility rite where they prayed for more kids, more crops, more cattle, or more everything. Now in a lot of these, that was excavated, that stone circle was excavated by a man called Eddie Fahey and a team going back the years. And they were working on it, I'd say, for about 6 or 8 weeks before they discovered a burial. I'd say a number of bones that were so secretly hidden that they practically missed it. Again, you see the rituals. You have lone bushes, lone trees. They had a major religious significance in that time. Now, in case I missed out anything on the stone circles, because we really have a very rich mine of them. The days that they marked out would have been, they marked out several days in the year. Law Bealtana, which would be in May, Midsummer in June. See, they'd be orientated to them. August, where you have Law Lunasa, 7th or 8th of August. November, Law Sauna, and then Midwinter, which would be where the stone circles would be involved, to be either Midwinter Sunset or Midwinter Sunrise. In all these stone circles going back, they were a place of huge gatherings for social gatherings, legal, industrial arranging. They had implications in practically every area of life and of living. Sorry now. That, I think, is Carriganima, Spidoga, Sparoga. What's the difference? Spidoga and Sparoga. What's a sparrow? Sparrowhawk. Yeah. Anyway, that is dry stonework, you see, which mightn't be going back hundreds of years. You see, it could be, it's in a very secluded place, kind of a hideaway. It could well be simply dry stone because of the times that were and the haste in which it was put up. Now, I don't know where the old, where was the church before this one? Does anybody know? Yeah, well, that must be so, the outline of it. I was lucky to find it, but again, the genius behind the camera wasn't too bright. Now, that's another look at it. I don't know how it looks now, but that should be excavated, and you get a metal detector. You'd never know what you would find around there. You could really burden the whole place around it, and for one thing, to clean it up. Now, I'm going out to burials, I suppose. When the people died, they had to bury him. That's Carriganima. How do you pronounce that? Anyway, Keegan was a giant, and that's his grave. And he'd be worth exploring. You see, you could lift off the capstone there if you got a JCB or something, and gee, you wouldn't know what you would find. That's we were going to do it, you know, but you know, I wasn't long enough in the place. If I get back, I will. Yes. Okay, here. Yeah. Now, I'm talking about graves. You see, graves are of various types, shapes, and sizes. That was one type. That was another. Okay, here. Nobody knows. Huh? Is it? Is it really? Yeah. Yeah. No, that's another. Now, anybody there from here? No? He's Keating on the right. Liz Kilcorny, is it? Sheehan, yeah. Farther forward. Now, on the left facing you is he Tarrant? Then I don't know who else, but that's Eddie Fahey. He was teaching geography in the college that time, and he used to do a lot of archaeology and a lot of digs during the holiday time. So we got him down there. We wrote him anyway and said there was to come down and see what was here. So I got back a snap kind of a letter to say we'll go down on a particular Sunday to see all the things which you say is in West Cork. But he saw all the things, and he came back several times. Fair play for him. He's giving out there at Lib, as you can see. Now, that's somewhere in Roaches, I'd say, but 'tis a massive setup. That's another look at it, where you're looking out to the horizon. Now, that's one of the, what you'd call a dolmen. I'd say heading up for Knocknakill or somewhere there. Maybe. That capstone now is absolutely huge, and it took an awful lot of engineering and all the rest to get it up on those stones. all the quarrying and the drawing. Now, that's the one in Scrahenard, a very famous one. The top is the capstone, which must be weighing quite a lot of tons. But you see, the front stone here now, I forget what you would call it, the technical name for it, it's facing east. Everywhere else in Ireland that these are found, they're facing west. The only place other than Scrahenard or than the area here is Aberdeen in Scotland, where you find them facing east. And if you ever notice in graveyards, you see the graves, head and feet, they're facing a particular way. I forget which direction now, is it west to east or whatever it is. Now, that's Mr. Fahey again, and I think it's the Scrahenard one he's talking about. Now, in that stone facing you, a standing stone facing you on which the capstone is resting, inside there's writing. Now, it failed me to photograph it, as you can imagine, because first of all, to get in there was a job. So all I could do was roughly scribble out what was there. Now, that is really world famous, that, which is known as Scrahenard Dolmen Pocking. Nobody can translate it. No matter how far back they'd go, whether it would be Ogham writing or runic alphabet or whatever it is, nobody has translated it, and they're only speculating as to what it is. But that has a major claim to fame now, that particular burial place of Dolmen. Now, other people, to go back again to the Dolmens, it was only important people, again, were buried in these. Chiefs of clans, heads of major families, kings, that element, and their families. Now, this is another form of burial, which I suppose we're somewhat used to ourselves. From the very earliest times, cremation was used. Then they buried them whole and entire. After another while, they went back to cremation, and then again they came further. Now, that's another type of a burial. It is known as a cairn. Now, when that was built, you see, it didn't look like that. It looked like this. That's a cairn in the V. And there's a fellow buried there called Grubb, G-R-U-B-B. He was a colonel, and he owned all the lands away down there in the Golden Vale. And he was buried in that, standing up in his regalia and his rifle and all the rest of it. But to go back again, these cairns looked like what I had been talking about, but they were what you would call robbed for the stones, for road making, for fencing, but particularly road making. In Knockraheen, I got the county council one day to burn a hole, I suppose anything up to 20 acres, as you're turning up for Danjo Kelleher's place there, just to the left of the road that you're turning up. And I'd say we discovered what was never known before. We discovered anything up to 15 or 16 of these. Now, the remains were only there. But a man called Charlie Mccarthy, he was secretary of the Cork Historical and Archaeological Journal at the time. I told him about it, and he came down, and he had a beautiful white trousers on him and a hat and all the rest of it. And he insisted on seeing them all, and he went, by God, when we were finished, his trousers was anything but white. But I was amused. But fair play for him. He was one of the few in that group that worked. Now, again, somewhat unusual. If you can trace with me, come along here out front, swing around right, up and around. That is known as a ringed barrow, which was another place of burial. We, on I'd say Liam Roach's instructions, we went up there one day. We had Eddie Fahey with us again. I'd say he was cutting turf at some stage, and they discovered some bones. Now, that ringed barrow is 50 feet across, 50 feet in diameter. And bang in the middle of it, that stone on your right was covering where that lock of water is. And we discovered and excavated human bones. I had them in a jam jar for years over in the house, and at some stage, Eddie Fahey rang me that he wanted them. I meant to bring them. I'm sure they're in the museum in Cork. He wanted to write an article. Shortly after the poor man died. But he didn't write the article. But you see, that was again a ritual killing. We got a sod of turf and sent it away for dating from the area. He also sent away some of the bones, and it would be roughly about 5,500 BC. Now what happened there was a young lad of about 16 was killed. His body was burned, and the bigger bones in the body didn't burn out totally. So they were collected, broken up into small pieces, put into what we would regard as earthenware flower pot. And in the middle of that barrow, that pot was turned upside down, and some quartz stones, very small quartz stones, placed around it. And I presume that was, not alone was it a burial, it was a place of worship as well. Now, in all that we found the quartz stones, we found charcoal, and we found some of the remains of the pot, which is there at the bottom. That's the charcoal on top, the three pieces to the right, certainly the two on top, and maybe on the right is part of the pottery. That Tory top I have here with me, where somebody found it under 14 sods of turf back in Ballydaly. And that would be at least 3,000 years old, because our turf was put down roughly about 1000 BC. So anything found under that huge layer of turf would be that age. On the right, on the left, I think, is either a piece of flint or a bit of the quartz stone. Now, again, to stick to the stones, you have stones that have writing in them called Ogham, O-G-H-A-M. You see, if you were anywhere important, or indeed if you weren't important, and if you were buried and they wanted to put up a headstone and a name, they simply said, A, maybe, son of B. Now, it began at one edge of the stone from the bottom and worked up. Again, it could start at the bottom of one side of the stone, go up to the top and down the other side, where you would have A, son of B, son of C, son of D, and so on. You had a good kind of a pedigree. Now, the writing was like that. It was all related to a common stem line, as you can see on top, that long line in the middle. Now, you had a series then of scratches below that line, above it, slantways across it, and at right angles up and down. And that's how, that was a very early form of Irish writing. Now, I suppose the best description that you could find of that, you see, you had this fella, and he was telling him the country at that time was in the rocks. Now, again, holding on to the burial places, see, that is, you also had a burial place called a kill or a killeen. And where you had this, you also had a church, and they're going back very far. But in this area now here, that you can see, a bit vague, it was taken in Michael Looney's place in, where is it, Kilpatrick, is it? Where you have a graveyard for unbaptized children, babies. Now, that held until maybe 100 years ago. You also had places in Kerry like that, where the eldest son in a family, if he died before 20, was also buried in places like that. Ah, God, that's about the end of now me what do you call it? Archaeology. That was taken on a May Sunday, which was very wet, many years ago, when Charlie Mccarthy, the man I was talking about with the white trousers and company, he brought out the Cork Historical and Archaeological Society to see what we had to see all that I said was in the West. But that's it now. Now, would you put on the light a second now, because I have a few more items. Oh, I presume that's my last, yeah. Regarding, sorry, no, that's a lot very technical and all the rest of it, and I'm sorry for boring you with it all. You see, you have holy wells, and they go back very, very far. You have pattern days, they follow a clockwise pattern around a well. Sometimes there's a kind of a hut built over the well, and you have pattern days here, there, and everywhere. Sure, I don't have to tell you. Now, to give a roundup of that, about 5000 BC, Ireland was cut off totally from Europe, land-wise. Now, from about 2500 BC, you had fishermen and farmers, therefore you had boats and nets. You had corn, flax, and rye. You had cattle, you had hunting. Now, from about 2000 BC, you had gold, silver, and metal, and blacksmiths became very, very important altogether. You had no fowl, but you had dogs, cattle, sheep, pigs, and horses. You had cabbage and parsnips. You had leather, you had hide, and you had weaving. Now, from about 1000 BC, you had razors, arrows, sickles, bracelets. Again, forts were used as dwelling places, and there was a very settled economy, and itinerants were very common. Now, from about 500 BC, it was more or less when iron came. You had bog ore. The farmers and the people were better equipped to look after land and timber. Again, the blacksmith was very important, and iron brought a very big change to life. You had riveting, you had bridle bits for horses, you had pottery, and you had stove lamps. I must switch on now to divisions. By boring you? Yeah. You had divisions, the divisions of Ireland. And the divisions in Ireland, as they were and are, were due to successive people who occupied the country. First of all, you had the provinces. You had 4. Formerly, you had 5. And they're possibly the oldest of all. And they were bounded and kind of set out by nature, by rivers and so on. And the modern names of these, Munster, Leinster, Ulster. You see, at the end of Munster, Leinster, and Ulster, you have the word stair, which is an Old Norse word meaning a steading or a possession or a firm holding. The chiefs were Munster, Ulster, Leinster. I don't know who these were. Now the counties, they're the most recent of all divisions. The dioceses, they go back to Celtic times, which I suppose would go back to 700 or thereabouts AD. There was a political unit in the province called the Tuath, Tuath, and the diocese was the union of a number of these. Then you had the baronies, and you have the baronies. It comes from baron, obviously, which is an Anglo-Norman word and came from when they invaded. There were the lands of the ancient Tuath, more or less put together by occupation from the baron. Now, you had parishes. Again, they were kind of Celtic, came from Celtic times, about 700 AD, and they were, at the beginning, managed by monasteries. The townlands of the smallest division of all, and their names are corruptions of simple descriptive names. To bore you a bit further, there is a place called Copine, is that? Where is it? Huh? Monaflook. Yeah. Now, the word Copine is or was a capstone. I presume that you put in a pier, is it? Is that a capstone? Or put in a wall? It is a capstone capable of locomotion. Now, you walk with it on your head 3 times around the church as a cure for headaches. Like the moving statues, you see, these were often borrowed as a kind of a charm, especially for a woman about to go into labour. And of course to take the clergy to forbid their use. Now, in Ballyvarane and Cooleyhan, can you hear of that? Where is that? Oh, that far. Are they in the parish? No. Anyway, it was discovered there that 2 chalybeate springs, CHALYBEATE, 2 chalybeate springs were discovered. And they correspond, I presume, to the type of water that's in Leamington Spa or maybe in Mallow Spa. Now, both springs were much used and found to be very good in curing, of all things, leprosy and various diseases of the glands and TB. Now, chalybeate, I had to look it up, its pronunciation and its meaning. It's a type of water having a very high content of iron. Now, the famine in 1840, whatever it was, wasn't the only famine that was in Ireland. Now, what I'm throwing out to you here affected this area as well, going back as far as can be found. You had plagues, pestilences, and sickness, and thousands died. To go back to 1491, you had a great famine. To go back to 1728, you had another famine. Now, I'm only throwing out dates now and events. In 1830, you had ferocious lightning, especially in this area, and thousands were killed. I'm skipping now hundreds of years. In 1517, you had a severe frost, and all the rivers in County Cork were frozen. In 1588, you had what was, I'm sure there's a medical name for it, a sweating sickness in County Cork. Again, many people died. In 1539, you had a very dry summer, and every river in the county dried up. In 1629, huge flocks of starlings were seen over the county, and especially the western part of it. They were flying and fighting. In 1710, you had the last award, I presume, given by the government for slaying a wolf. Again in 1741 and 42, a huge number of the poor people died in a famine in these 2 summers. I think that's all the notes I've taken in that section. Will you survive a few more slides? Any questions on that? Because I don't have to talk when I'm showing the next, and I can flick through them very fast. No questions, which is very handy. There's a finger behind page. No question at all in that? But you know what? You believe it or you don't believe it, and I mean, can't you say one way or the other? It might cause a row. Say one thing, you're a mighty patient crowd. Can I keep going? All right. Now, this is a mixture of slides that I took while I was here. I'm only sorry I didn't take hundreds or even thousands more. Now, again, I'm apologizing for the quality. That's my fault. It was the first camera I ever had. It was a kind of an automatic light meter, and I just couldn't use it. Anyway, I'd say your only interest now will be to look at these fellas and to look at them now and see how they look, whether they got younger or older or better looking or whatever it might be. I keep going. Tell me if I'm going too fast now. This was in the famous Clondrohead carnivals. Is it? Right? All right. Now, if I'm going too fast, hold me up. That was a Mccarthy dinner we had in Credence Hotel, and they had a fierce array of prizes. Huh? Yeah. You've Tony, I don't know the girl on the left, you've Tony Buckley, Tyke Stanton, John Callahan, Eddie Welsh, Father O'Connell. At the back then I'm a bit lost, very lost. Can she shout and tell us who they are?
Tony Buckley, Tyke Callahan, Alan Callahan, Eddie Welsh, Monsignor.
No. Yeah, she was. Yeah, that's right.
No, she's not in on there.
No, the one extra there.
I don't know.
Is she very white?
No. Right? Now keep going. And his dark specs. What was in that? That was an entry from here.
That was the Dr. Kildare.
What? Yeah. Watch now. Yeah.
That's Dr. Kildare.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
That's the side.
Yeah. That's where we had the saw and the sausages. Yeah. And the dye. Yeah. Nobody here who was there? No. Aye. I'd say that was Father O'Connell's first year as PP here. You see. He was an ex-inmate in the army one time, and he decided to bring him down for a display because of the connection, and that was their final, yes, at the carnival. That was our cabaret now. It was an English cabaret we put on. I'd say it was the first ever for Mccarthy Ferme. And you wouldn't believe it, we won the county. And we beat White Church in the final, and I'll tell you why they claim we beat them. Do you see under the table? As Dan John O'Kelleher, Paddy and his dog, and they claimed we won the competition because of the dog. Well, We were lucky to get that worm from the barracks in Macrome. But some fella borrowed it from me and never gave it back to me. An intelligent looking man, isn't he? If he had black specs now, he'd look even better. And I mean, to be fair to the fellow now, that was a new melodeon or piano accordion he bought for that competition. No wonder we'd win. That was a Mccarthy play, was it? What was it? No. Yep, that was it. Yeah. That's Michael Mccarthy, isn't it? Tim. Helen Donovan, yeah. Yeah. That's Dennis Donovan on the left, isn't it? And Connie Bond. Tim, yeah. Yeah. Where is he now? Where's he? How does he look now?
You've not wait.
What? Hey, God, you're right. Must be Christmas time. That's Tim Mccarthy there again. How the hell did he get into all of them? I'd say that was that cast. Did he That's a serious business. My God, they're mad for a fight. Huh? Same again. That was our damsel from Dublin that we put on here. Eileen Lynch, Nelly Coakley. Who was in between or yeah, but who was in between Nelly and Nora Keller? Go to the back. That's Sean Dennehy, and that's One. Oh no, Sean Dennehy, Perry Corkery, One, Liam Roach, and some other body. Oh. Would you know? Sorry, no, that's only a slide of a photo. You see? Yeah. You're right, we're only wasting time. I don't know what that was taken in aid of, or when, you see, I'm sure the Mona Fluck lads are there as well, Michal or Reardon. I couldn't recall now why that was taken. I'd say it's outside the school here, is it? Yeah. No, that's Noreen. She's O'Leary. Is she Margaret O'Leary? Yeah. And Vera, your lace is showing. Shout those names to me. Margaret Horgan is the only one there I know. Who's on the left? Go back to the left. That's not Eileen Duggan. On the left, back at the back. Yeah? Go on. Yeah. Peter, would you know them? But have they Monoflook as well? Have they? Any girl in front? Would any? Where? On the left? In front? Yeah. Who are the others? I keep going. Sorry, yeah. Yeah. No improvement there. Same group of girls, is it? And who are the fellas? Huh?
That's Christine, Timothy, and there in the Bible.
Ja, heller blir så torrt som blev. Right? That's Peter O'Halloran on the left, isn't it? In the back? Yeah. Would you know any more?
Two twins, Christian Tim.
Christian Tim, right. Yeah. And the other lads on the floor? Yo. On the left, Timmy Linehan, John, is he Eddie McDonough at the back? Who's near?
O'Brien.
The fellow left, second from the left altogether. Man in front. Or on the right? Yeah. Who? Dennis O'Neill, Mount Horna. Sorry now. Who's at the back? Vera, is that you? And? Is it really? And that's more, isn't it? And more is yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Right? Who? Which one? Bill Tohey? Go where? Is Anne there, the wife?
Eddie Conan.
Monica, is she here? Is that, was that the day Mary got her first communion? Or was it Raina? The primary cert. That's primary cert now. And I met some girl last night in Clondrohead and she thanked me for doing the exam on the board for her. But that year, you know, Father Barrow was here at the time and he insisted that I would, supervise one school and he would do the other, you see, and we were paid nothing for it. So I said I might justify my existence anyway and do the exam for him. But that very same year, there was a classmate of mine called Michael O'Doherty. He was a curate somewhere in South Kerry. And he did the exact same, but he made a mistake. in one of the sums, and there was a fierce inquiry from the department on it. Sorry. Who are they? Would you know? Is she Chrissy Callahan on the right? Yeah. Is he John Buckley's brother, the lad down there with the blue shirt, Genzi? What's his name? Huh? Connie Buckley, yeah. She's O'Leary on the left, is she? No? Oh yeah, maybe, yeah. It's not, you see, but you Connie Buckley, but I'd say they were in the one school. I'd say the two schools were together for that. Right? Do you want to go back again? That was our team now, that John Lucy and McDenny and a few of us, we kind of resurrected something other than the GA. And that was the first team we got together. And we decided to get a new set of jerseys or a different set of jerseys. And some of the GA fellas, the old stagers, they kicked up that we didn't get the right colours of Clondroid when they won the All-Ireland long ago. Would you know those fellas' names? Go left at the back. Is that James Larry? Go on. Huh? That's John Buckley, kind of middle ways. Go on out from there. Are you sure? Yeah. I'd say it is. I keep going. That was a group now taken in Inch. I wasn't long there at the time, and I'd say a gang came down to see was I surviving. And huh? Who's behind Sean Dennehy?
That's him.
And who's on the right? Is that Connie Buckley?
I'd say so,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Teresa Pad, that's right.
Yeah. It's no one's reading him, right?
Tis?
No one's reading him.
Yeah. That was an outing again, I'd say, looking up archaeological stuff. Who's on the right? No. To the right again. I know, yeah. Connie Buckley is there. Danjo. Is that John, what's his name? Was he John Bennett? The fellow way, Dan Bennett, the fellow way behind that lady with the...
Jimmy Sullivan, Sean Fairfield, isn't it? Dan Bennett.
Oh, yeah.
Daniel Kelleher. Ollie Sullivan.
Oh, yes.
Paddy Buckley.
I told you not to show that one. Twas the poor man's last day of freedom. No, I'm practically there. That was an Asparagus plumosus, one of these ferns that I grew over in the house when I was here. It climbed and climbed and climbed, became very healthy, and that was it. I had also a gadget called an Asparagus Fern, a basket type of one. And from sheer neglect, I have never seen it doing the like, ever or ever heard of it or ever read of it. From sheer neglect, it flowered. That's an Easter cactus, believe it or not. Beautiful scenery. My God. Yeah. I got. Them were the days. And the Volkswagen. Where's the shepherd? There's one fella not looking down at all, you see him there? But it's just sheer look. Actually, that was, I'd say someday I was away up the mountains there with Johnny Sullivan, we were researching and what's that now? If you get a camera, you can let the lens open. That's the moon now and Venus. Father O'Brien, you'd be interested in that. I bet you never did as well. It badly wanted a painting. Tis there's no point in saying it, but it's a pity it's so bad. No, that is now the day John Lucy read the proclamation for in 50 years for the Easter Rising. Very, wettish, but Stephen Roach is a Christy Goggin or Thomas Goggin, Connie Welsh, Danjo, Connie Welsh, John Lucy, Oni, Dan Goggin, and who is in the distance, yeah. That was in 1966, I'd say Easter Sunday. There were celebrations all over to commemorate the Easter Rising, 1916. So he read the proclamation for us. God, the church badly wanted a painting then. Sorry, no, it is. Well, this is where we came in, and this is where we go out. Sorry, no, hold on a second. I want no formalities, and I gave him publicity enough. Is that what you're going to do? Tell him, propose about it? For God's sake, stop. Look, shut your mouth. I'm delighted to see you. I'm delighted you're well. I'm delighted you're alive.
We do the answers and thank you, Father.
And now, thanks for listening. Great audience.
Very nice.
Last three. No, there's one thing about the book. I gave a massive credit. I think somebody in the village got a book with 4 blank pages.
Oh my God.
No, that's a printer's error. And if you get a faulty book or a book with blank pages, bring them back and we'll replace it. There's text and pictures in every page. So there should be no blank page in any one of the books.
Also,
Barrow will start back there. I can get you out. Small bit, small bit. That's good now.
Now we welcome another visitor to the Carriganima Golden Jubilee celebrations. Mr. Healy, who is a retired inspector of the Department of Agriculture, once attended agriculture and Irish classes in this school. Mr. Healy, would I be right in saying that it was you who organised these classes?
Yes, you could say that.
How did these come about? Would you like to tell us?
Well, it started, I was at that time secretary to the Carriganima branch of the Cork Farmers Union.
And what connections to the Cork Farms Union with this school?
Well, that we used to hold our meetings here, and we held regular monthly meetings for a long time. The object of that association was, of course, to improve the marketing conditions for the farming community. The marketing condition to improve the methods of marketing their produce. So at one of those meetings, it was suggested that the people were getting no expert advice on how to produce crops, how to fertilize the crops, and also how to market the goods properly. So I was asked to get in touch with the Cork County Committee of Agriculture and try and arrange a winter agricultural class here in Carriganima, which I duly did. And I contacted the county committee. The secretary at the time happened to be a Clondrohid man too. He was Mr. Corcoran from Kilvaltra, and he was only too glad. And he put me on to Mr. Dan Curran, who was one of the two agricultural advisors for the county at the time. So we arranged, he arranged to come out here some evening, and we interviewed the parish priest, of course, and the local teacher.
Who was the teacher at this time?
Mr. Eugene Lynch, who was afterwards Deputy Chief Inspector of the Department of Agriculture. And both of them were only too delighted, of course. So we set about organising the class. And we got a fine crowd, a very good crowd to attend. All the teenagers and young men of the district came along to the class. And Mr. Curran came along 2 nights a week for the whole winter of 1929 and the early part of 1930. Many years ago, of course. But the instructions given were very useful, and a lot of all those who attended got a lot of advice on how to grow their crops, how to cultivate them, how to use the proper fertilizers for the different crops.
Do you think it made a big difference in their farming at that
It
time?
certainly did, and you could see some of the results of that here today. Of course, they have still vast improvements from those days. But I'm delighted to come back here and see the vast improvements that have taken place.
Do you remember any of those members of the classes at that time?
Well, I remember quite a few of them, but unfortunately, I don't know of only one who is alive at the present time. That is Dennis Duggan. Now we had the two Riordans, Michael and Tim, and Peter, God rest him, and Neddy Welch, that's Eddie's father, and a man named Buckley over here, and several others. Now, to take a long time to mention all of them, because we had about 25 or 6 altogether at the classes. And they were delighted. But unfortunately, when the winter was over and the class had to be terminated, of course, those classes were only conducted during the winter. And they were very disappointed. We couldn't have the class repeated for the following winter, but of course that was out of the question because of the small number of agricultural advisors in the county at the time.
Is it true that you set up an Irish class then instead of the agricultural classes?
It is. We did. After discussion, we decided that the next best thing was to have an Irish class. We could manage to get an Irish teacher at the time. He was Mr. Frank Kelly from Ballymakeera. He was just qualified as an Irish teacher at the time, and he was looking for a position, looking for a job. So he was delighted to come and spend the winter here with us again for the 3 nights a week again. And we had the same attendance and very interested.
Was it just for one winter that carried on?
One winter again, because Frank got a position, a permanent appointment then at Waterfall near Cork. So that left us high and dry again.
It was an end to your classes.
It did. Well, after that then, I don't know whether there were any other classes here or not. I think there were some classes, maybe cookery classes or something like that, but a very short time afterwards, I left the district myself. I joined, got a job in the Department of Agriculture. So I've been absent from the district since.
You couldn't attend any other classes?
No.
If there were and you weren't?
No, well, they could, because I was in Tipperary and Wexford and so on for a number of years then, and I was out of touch.
You travelled quite a bit, so.
I did, quite a bit. But I found, mind you, that winter agricultural class, a few of the lads won scholarships to the agricultural school in Clonakilty after it, and I found it was very useful to me when I was afterwards looking for a job in the department. As well, of course, as the useful information I got while I was at home farming at the time, or at least helping with the farming. So every one of the lads I met who were interested at the time, who attended the class, were delighted and hoped that they would have another class again as soon as possible afterwards. So,
thanks very much, Mr. Healy, for all that information. Thanks for talking to us. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to come back here and meet, while unfortunately I can't meet any of my old school pals or those. I'm delighted to meet their sons and their daughters. So we have to make room for the young generation, of course.
That's right.
And I wish you every success. I'm delighted to meet you all, and delighted with the improved standards in this district. Same as every other district, you know, the conditions in farming and have been much improved, and the work, of course, is much easier. And the returns much better, the profits are much better, and you have a much better standard of living nowadays than prevailed at that time.
Were you happy that the celebrations took place so as you could see the difference in the school?
I am, very much so, very much so. And it's wonderful to come back and see the progress that has been made. Look around at the fields now and see how green they are and how fertile they are, and see the improvement in the houses in the village and the school and all. It was the old school in those days, of course, and while there was plenty of room in it, it wasn't so comfortable. But generally speaking, the results have been very much improved. Conditions generally, and the standard of living certainly has improved immensely. And I'm delighted, and I thank you very sincerely for inviting me here to this celebration tonight.
You're very welcome indeed.
And thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Little men here anyway.
There's a boiler written on top of this page in here.
Tobacco. Provisions of decimals.
You're on the spot. We did it, you wouldn't know anyway. You were next to it. We're made for life now.
And we just.
Yeah, yeah. We're like the Three Stooges now. The boys being badly caught. I will not dare look at the camera.
Here we are in Carriganima School at the final meeting of the Golden Jubilee Committee. The celebrations are now over, so we'll have a word with the chairman to see what he thinks of the weekend. Nettie, would you like to say a few words?
Celine. Well, I think the weekend was a tremendous success. It was a success beyond our wildest dreams. We've met, some of us met people that we'd meet for maybe 20, 30 years. I think I heard one man saying to another down in Clonderhead Hall, I haven't seen you for 47 years. And you know, to bring people together like that, there's great satisfaction in doing something like that. Personally, I would like to thank all the members of the committee here present. They were all fantastic. Each and every one of them did their part. And the success of the weekend is due solely to them. I would also like to thank the general public who supported us, our sponsors who gave us spot prizes, who took ads in our book, and without whom we would be very short financially. I would like to thank Danjo for doing the video of the whole event, and in general I think that it was an exercise well worthwhile. We got great satisfaction out of doing it, and who knows, maybe we might celebrate the 60th anniversary in 10 years' time.
There's no sort of there's no no-go areas, you know, really.
Right. We would like you to meet a person who's a personal friend of mine. To most of you, he is known as Father John Buckley. But to me, he has always been John Buckley. And we'd like to trace his career to date so far. He is now working as a priest in London. John, what part of London are you in?
At the moment, James, I'm in a place called Bayswater. It's basically west of London. Bayswater, Notting Hill Gate. It's in W2. It's really between Paddington and Shepherd's Bush. It's very cosmopolitan area. London itself is very cosmopolitan anyway. And my parish reflects that very, very strongly indeed.
Yeah. We're having this talk now here in the living room of your old home in Carriganima. To you, this is home, would that be correct?
Absolutely. Carriganima and Carriganima and Ireland, you might say, in more general terms, is always home for me. This is where I was born. My roots, both physical and spiritual, lie here, and I will always regard Caharbran as my home. England, London, is really my second home, you could say my adopted home.
Yes. You were born the eldest of 4 children, 2
That's
boys
right.
and 2 girls.
That's right, that's right.
Mary, your mother, and your late father, Denny Jono. What are your memories, your earliest memories of growing up in this house?
Well, my earliest memories obviously go back to the very early 50s. I was born in 1950. I certainly remember my grandfather, particularly his being in the house. I think he was laid up for most of the time that I knew him, because he broke his leg and was consequently laid up. He died in 1955, February of 55, and I certainly remember that event distinctly, the actual death in the house, the funeral, and so forth. Obviously, I remember my father very well, and my mother as well. I think I remember the birth of my brother Connie, who was born 2 years and 9 months after me. And I think I remember his being brought to the house here after his being born, presumably in Macroom Hospital. So my very earliest memory dates back to that particular time.
God, that's extraordinary. You would have gone to Carriganima National School at 5 years?
I went to Carriganima National School at the beginning of 1955, probably April of 55. I remember distinctly being taken to the school on the first day. I went back to the creamery with my father in the horse and cart, and then I was taken to the school, which, as we all know, lies on the western side of the village.
Who was the teacher? Was it Miss O'Keefe?
Miss O'Keefe was certainly there. She was the mistress, and Master Lucy was the master. I used to walk to the school quite a lot, but also the master, I think for the first few years anyway, the master used to take us to the school. I remember his driving a green Morris Minor at that time, and I think he took us to school most days and brought us back again in the evening afterwards.
Was there any change of teachers while you were in the school?
I think there was. I think the mistress, Miss O'Keefe, moved on, and another person, Miss O'Connor, I think, moved in. But by that stage, or certainly soon after that, I moved into the master's room. So my contact with the mistress would have been stopped at that point.
Right. You were always interested in football, certainly.
Absolutely.
You have to be, because on both sides of the family there was a strong tradition of playing football. Would you say that was the family tradition, or the kicking around of a football at school mostly influenced you, or was it a mixture of both?
I was influenced by both. I think I had a natural intrinsic interest in football. I'm told that the first thing I ever did, which I can't remember of course, was to kick a football. It seemed to be a natural part of my being to kick football. As you say as well, there was that tradition in the house. My father was certainly very interested in the game. My uncles on both sides were very interested as well. John Cruhor from Ardeen was supposed to have been a good footballer. Tim Buckley here, my other uncle, was also a footballer of some standing. At school itself, I remember the curate at that time, who was Father Burns, bringing a size 4 football to the school, and we all began to play this football. So basically, I was football crazy from the outset, you could say that.
Right. Was it in the schoolyard the football was played, or across the road in Neddy Welch's
We
field?
played it in both places, as I recall. We certainly played it in the schoolyard, yes. We were sometimes overseen by the master there. But we also played it down in the field, which was obviously more spacious for that purpose.
Yes. Can you remember the pick of the teams or anything extraordinary about them?
You mean at school?
At school?
Not an awful lot, I'm afraid. I really can't remember an awful lot. Another thing, of course, which certainly stimulated my interest in football at a very early stage was my being taken to football matches as far away as Cork. I used to go there quite regularly. Neddy Welch, old Neddy Welch in the village, used to take me. Connie Jim Conn used to take me. My uncle Connie Buckley used to take me to Cork quite regularly from a very early stage. And also at Macroom there were games practically every Sunday in those days, and my interest and my desire for football was certainly stimulated by my being taken to matches.
Right. When you started playing matches yourself, what were the first matches you remember or recall?
I went to the national school in Macroom for a year, 6th class in Macroom, and I was immediately recruited for the team there, for the Macroom team, by one of the brothers. Round or about the same time, this would have been 1963, Father Buckley and McDanny started up the team here. There hadn't been a team in Clonderhood for some time prior to that, but they started up a juvenile football team, under 14 and under 16, and we began to play over in Horrigan's field. And we did some training there. A team was entered into the Muskerry competition. This was under 14 and under 16, 1963. So really my playing football dates back or began at that time.
Right. When you were playing football, would you agree with me that you were a person who concentrated very much on the skill of the game? Your strong points were high fielding, toe to hand, and bursting out of defence with the ball. Do you think that if you continued on, that you would be doing much the same thing at the present day?
That's a very good question indeed, James. As you well know, my football career, in a way, came to an end before it started. And this was a major disappointment for me in life. In fact, if I ever had a disappointment in life, I think that was it.
How did it come about, John?
I was playing football with your brother, actually, Martin, just kicking about one Sunday, and I injured my knee, which was subsequently operated upon, but I'm afraid I was never the same afterwards. So my football career as such was destroyed to begin with, even before it started. But you mentioned the type of football which I did play and which I was noted for the short time that I did play. In those days, football was very much the catch and kick variety or style, and the place I loved playing in was at full back. I developed an ability to catch and kick the ball there from a very early stage. It was the thing that I love most. I love fielding the ball. I seem to have had a natural ability to catch the ball, and I was ambidextrous as well, which means that I could turn, which meant that I could turn any way to kick it. And I suppose I was rather strong, but I lay the emphasis very much on the skill of the game. I never concentrated or worried about the other player. I just loved playing the ball, basically.
Right.
That was it.
What age were you when you had the operation, really?
I was 14 when I had the operation, and I had been out of the game for about 6 months prior to the operation itself, and this was going to be the start of the great comeback afterwards. I made several attempts to come back, but really it was never the same. I played some football afterwards, obviously, but the knee was not right, and I just wasn't able, to make it.
Right. We'll leave the footballing side so for a while, and we'll move on to your studies. You moved from Macroom National School to De La Salle, and you spent 5 years there. How did you travel to and fro?
I travel to and fro every day on the bicycle. Not for the entire period, because in March of '68 the transport system came in. So I had the pleasure of the bus, I think, for the last few months.
And the distance was about 5 miles?
The distance was 5 miles. It was an easy ride into Macroom from here with the fall of ground, but it was a much more testing job coming home in the evenings, facing the hill.
Right. When you left Macroom, you moved on to university?
Yes, when I left Macroom, I went to university to do dairy science. I had passed an entrance examination in dairy science, so I was in college for a couple of years, which in one sense was a fairly fruitful period for me, experientially at least. In another sense, it was a rather turbulent period.
Yes. When you left college, you worked in a few places around the county?
Yes, I certainly worked afterwards for a little while. I spent some months back in Skibbereen, or a place beyond Skibbereen called Affadown, there with the Dairy Disposal Company. I had spent some time as well during my course in places like Coachford, which was also a dairy disposal company, and of course with Clondalk Co-op. I spent some time with them as well. But really, my time working was not very long. It certainly wasn't a very sustained period of employment as far as I was concerned.
Was it at some time during this stage then that you decided to enter the priesthood?
Yes. I think I had decided on the priesthood before I left college finally. I think that would have been in March of 1971. I had inklings about the priesthood. I think I was, at that time, I was trying to decide what I would do with my life. So I was going through a period of thinking. I was philosophizing about myself and about my future and about my life and about life in general and its meaning. And it was through that kind of questioning and quest and analysis of my state of being that I eventually arrived at a notion of joining the priesthood. I saw it as a way of serving God and serving others, and I began to think that this was a very purposeful way of spending one's life.
Did this happen suddenly, or was it over a gradual period of time? John?
Well, when it happened, James, it was certainly pretty sudden, I would think. But once it arrived, I began to contemplate more and more. So I had this vision of wanting to do something purposeful with my life. I was at a kind of crossroads or a threshold at the time. I was 21, and I opted for the priesthood at that point.
Right. That was the beginning where of your priestly life. What was the first positive step, shall we use that term, that you did towards becoming a priest?
Well, the next step then was to decide on a college, to get in touch with a college.
Now, who was the first person you told that you were going to be a priest, or that you had inklings or thoughts of becoming a priest?
I'm not so sure if I told that many actually, James. I can't remember revealing this great decision to anybody in particular. I probably mentioned it to one or two, yes.
Family?
Not particularly. Perhaps. I certainly was friendly with other priests around the place. I was friendly at that time with Father O'Keefe. I also knew one or two other priests around the place. And of course, this was an influence as well, remember. My contact with other priests, travelling with them and all the rest of it. This was an influence on me as well in coming to this decision to go forward.
Right. You arrived at the decision. How did you go forward?
I went forward by getting in touch with St. Patrick's College, Carlow. So I got in touch with the president there, Father O'Connell. Daniel Celsius was the parish priest here at the time. He wrote a letter of commendation for me, a reference, to satisfy the requirements of the college. And it was then a simple matter of going to the college, which I went there, I think, November of 71.
What was your first impression of the place?
Well, I went, I think, with all sorts of impressions. I think the dominating impression was that I was going to be joining a very monastic, very sanctimonious, a very holy, inverted commas, establishment. And probably that's how I saw it for the first few weeks. It was a very disciplined, very ordered place, where one's humanity, so to speak, didn't seem to be given the opportunity to express itself or to come to the fore. But after some weeks there, I began to realize that all the people there, and at that time I think there were 120 students in the college, they were all just ordinary chaps really, who liked a bit of fun as well.
What was your average day there like? How was the routine?
The routine was indeed very routine, you might say. It was early rising in the morning for meditation, morning prayer and mass, followed by breakfast, and then we'd have class or lectures until midday, until dinner time. And then we were free in the afternoons for games, basically, or for any other pursuits that we wanted to carry out, obviously within the confines of the college. We weren't allowed out very much. I think bar 1 day per week or something we were allowed out. Then in the evenings there was a study period, followed by supper, followed by relaxation.
Did you look forward to holidays?
Oh, very much so, yes, very much so indeed. Holidays were very necessary indeed for us. They were a way of escaping from the rather rigid seminary system that certainly pertained when I went there, though it was changing, because when I went to the seminary, you were in a period of transition, really, between the old system, which was very, very strict, and the new system, which was coming in slowly, and which was obviously more liberal, and allowed the student a greater opportunity to express himself and to be responsible for himself.
Yes. 5 years you spent in Carlow?
I was there 5 years, and I left there as a deacon. I was ordained deacon on the 14th of April 1976.
What does that mean?
Well, to be a deacon means that one is in major orders. It is the final and crucial step on the road to priesthood proper.
Right.
So it's a very important step, and it's a very eventful one as well.
How many started in your class and how many finished?
I think about 16 finished out of probably 24, 25.
Yes, and that would be average?
That would be average. The average success rate, if you can speak in those terms, was about 50%. Most people would tend to drop out in the first year or two. After that, you tended to have less people leaving after that.
The people who leave, would they speak with other people, or would they just make up their own minds?
Well, in some cases, I think the decision to leave was made for them. It was a strict system, remember, totally unlike one's experience at university, because at university, all you've got to do really is to pass your examinations. It's an academic system, and if you pass your examinations and come up to the required standards, then you're all right. The seminary system was a bit different and a bit more comprehensive, because not only did it involve academia, it involved one's spiritual development, one's personal and social development as well. So if you were seen to be lacking in any of these areas, you might be advised to leave, yes. And that was not uncommon, I can assure you.
So really what the authorities were trying to do is to make sure it wasn't square pegs and round holes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
You left Carlow as a deacon?
I left Carlow as a deacon to go to university in London.
Was that of your choice, or was it a...
Well, it was offered. It was offered to me by the diocese in Westminster. They wanted me to do some studies over at a Heathrow college, which is part of the University of London. I could have refused to go, I suppose, but I think in a way I was only anxious to leave the seminary. I'd been there long enough, and when the opportunity arose, I think I took it with both hands, and I went over and I studied a subject called Pastoral Theology for a year over there. I also, during that year, I did some work as a deacon in a parish. It also gave me the opportunity to have a first-hand experience of what I was letting myself in for afterwards.
Yes. Had you decided at this stage that you were going to be a missionary priest in inverted commas?
Yes, in fact that decision had been made much earlier on, because one of the things about going for the priesthood is that you must decide on a diocese at the very outset. In my own case, I obviously had a choice between the home diocese Clyne or any other diocese that I wanted to go to, be it in England or be it in the United States. But I chose London, as it happened, just with the bright lights and that kind of thing, and I had been around here long enough, and I was anxious to see a bit more of the world, and I thought London would be the ideal place to go to.
Yes.
You see.
No, you were not ordained a priest the first year you were there?
No. This was the year prior to the actual ordination, and I was ordained in June of 77.
Did you have to come back to Carlow for any training?
No. I was finished with Carlow completely at this point. I had no more contact whatsoever with Carlow.
Yes. So you came back from London and you were ordained in Ballinagreed?
I was ordained in Ballinagreed
by
Bishop Ahern of Clyne. I was one of 4 men ordained on that great day.
Yes. Pat Scanlon,
Padder Murphy, and there was a Toomey man from Bellaverne ordained there as well.
Pat Scanlon is now in Ahabullock.
That's right.
Padder Murphy is in the Diocese of Clyne as well.
That's right.
And Toomey man is a Norther priest.
Yes, I'm not so sure where he is. He was an Order man, but I don't know where he is at this point.
That was in June of 77?
That was in June of 77, yes.
Yes. And you said your first mass in?
I said my first mass the following day
in
Carriganima.
Yes.
Father McGuane was the curate here in Carriganima at that time.
That is obviously a memory that stands out in your mind.
Yes. In a way, I suppose, being ordained and saying one's first mass is really the end of a process, so to speak.
It is certainly something that stands out in the minds of the people in the locality, because it is an event that they would attend and they would remember.
Yes, absolutely, yes.
From your point of view, it would be the end of a process. You were given so many weeks, so many months, holidays, shall we say, or freedom?
Yes, I was around here for some time then. After that, probably for about two months or so.
Yes.
I was about, and I said mass in Carriganima on several occasions, also in Clondrahod, the other side of the parish.
Yeah. Now, you have a fully fledged priest, and you go to Westminster. You're attached to the Diocese of Westminster.
That's right.
What was your first parish there?
My first parish was in a place called Hanwell, which is West London, W7 and W13, I think.
Population?
Population, very, very big population actually, and very Irish. Hanwell is a very Irish area, was then, still is. So it was a bit like home from home, really. Being a priest in that parish, it was like being at home. There were so many Irish people about.
How many churches were in the parish?
There was one church in the parish, one main church.
Parish priest?
There was a parish priest and another curate as well. Yes.
How many people were you administering to?
At that time, we had a mass attendance of 2,500, I would imagine.
And how many masses on a Sunday?
Some years ago now, it's hard to remember. I would say we had about 6 masses
Yes.
About 6 masses for that.
So you would
number.
have an average 2 masses in a Sunday and one each day.
Yes,
Yeah.
that would be pretty average, yes.
What other sort of work are you involved in?
Well, basically, general pastoral work, visiting parishioners, getting to know parishioners. There was a club in the parish as well, which was also a useful way of getting involved. Obviously, saying Mass every day, baptizing, marrying, burying the dead, and dealing with the sick.
Yes.
Basically, general pastoral work.
You were not like the conquistadores of the Spaniards. You weren't going out with a sword in one hand and baptizing them on the other as a missionary. It wasn't a case of going
I'm afraid not. I'm afraid
No.
not. No.
No, it was hard, routine work that had to be done all the time. At any stage, do you go out, I use the phrase go out, at any stage, do you come into circumstances where you bring new people into the Roman Catholic Church who have not been members before?
Not really. I mean, that might be the idea. But generally speaking, in England, from my experience there, it is very much a maintenance job, certainly at the ground level. Obviously, it's mission as well, but in real terms, it's a matter of maintenance, keeping what you have going.
Yes.
That's important. Obviously, it is mission as well, but lapsation has always been very high in England, really. And when people lapse, they tend to discontinue completely at a certain point, and it's not easy to get them back. Their affiliation with the church becomes totally severed, and that's it, really. But also as well, you're dealing with large numbers of people. So if they all came, you probably couldn't cope, you see.
Right. What other parishes have you worked in?
After Hanwell, I spent 2 years in Hanwell. Then I went to West Green in Tottenham, South Tottenham, and spent another couple of years there. One thing I suppose which I should mention as a kind of extra or addendum is this, that my interest in football, of course, came to the fore very strongly again. Being in London, I was particularly fortunate to be able to have access to all the First Division football grounds in London. So during my time in Hanwell, which we've just spoken about, I used to go and see Queen's Park Rangers quite a lot. That was pretty close to us. Then when I moved to Tottenham and subsequently to Enfield, I was very close to both the Tottenham Hotspur football ground and to the Arsenal football ground. And I used to be a very frequent visitor to both. So that was a major plus, really, being in London.
Yes.
Quite distinct from the pastoral activities that I was supposed to be involved in.
What differences do you see in Ireland now when you come to holidays as distinct to 10 years ago when you were ordained first?
Oh, I see major differences, really. Major differences indeed. And hopefully for the better, or at least many of them. The one thing that is certainly noticeable to anybody who comes home from England is the tremendous volume of traffic that you tend to get on Irish roads at the present time. The number of cars seems to have expanded enormously, particularly over the past 5 or 6 years. But of course there are many other changes as well, I'm sure. Ireland has become a very technical society. It's become far more sophisticated. It has become a less insular society. So it's like any other country now that you go to in the world. Science and technology seem to have come in quite a lot over the past 10, perhaps even 15, 20 years. And I'm sure that's all for the better.
Do you meet many young Irish people who have immigrated in your work?
I've been asked that question several times. Really, I don't in my particular area, and there's a very good reason for that, that the cost of accommodation in my particular area is so high that it would be difficult for anybody to be able to afford the cost of accommodation. So that's a strong factor against Irish people, young Irish people who have just gone over, coming into my area. I'm sure there are many Irish people in London, but I don't come across them, young Irish people who have just gone over. But I certainly come across the Irish people in my parish who have been there for many years. In fact, most of the Irish people in my parish, my present parish, Bayswater, they've been there since the 1920s and 30s perhaps. They went over during that period between the wars, because Paddington, which is very close to me, was the place that they went to. The big train station is there, as you know. The people went there. It was an immigrant area, and many of them are still there, but obviously showing on years at this point.
Yes. What employment had those people drifted into, or gone into?
Which people now?
The people who went between the wars.
Most of the Irish people who went between the wars and since the last war, of course, most of them involved themselves in the building industry. Certainly the majority of the men would have involved themselves in the building industry. You could say that the building industry in England is controlled by the Irish.
Yes.
It's an Irish-controlled industry. The women then, many of them would have gone in for domestic work, and many as well for nursing. The Irish are a very hard-working people, and I'm convinced that the Irish who went to England certainly worked very, very hard indeed.
Do you find any racism?
Not blatant. I'm certain that it was there. One does hear about it. At that time, certainly after the war, there was certainly racism as far as the Irish and the black community, who were also moving in, particularly from the West Indies, were concerned. It's not blatant. Obviously, you've got all these acts, race relations acts and equality acts and so forth. My own feeling is that there may be a little racism, though it's somewhat subtle. But it's not blatant or overt, and it doesn't really affect the Irish as such, at least not greatly.
Would you go back and do it all again?
I think so, yes. I think so. My initial reason for going, I think, was to broaden my experience of life. In a way, I suppose, to escape the insularity of home life here. And going to a different country, and certainly going to England, is a very broadening experience. Many people, of course, here were fed with the idea that going to England was a bad thing, really. It was the place where one lost one's Catholicism and all the rest of it. It was a very sort of un-Catholic place to go to. But nevertheless, I saw it as a broadening experience. I'm convinced that it did broaden my perspective of things, and I'm glad I went, and I think I would do it again, yes.
Right. Father John Buckley, thank you very much.
Thank you, James.
We eventually went to the strike.
We were the weak side, yeah.
You were happy enough with the things?
With what, mate?
With the questions and answers?
Oh, yes. Seemed to be, we were probably both a bit strained, were we? We were a bit strained, were we, I thought.
No, I don't think
No,
so.
you were fine.
We were okay.
You were quite even pace from start to finish.
Yeah.
You didn't.
Yeah.
You kept the same gear on.
Yeah.
You didn't,
No,
it
we
was
didn't.
fine.
You see, if we did the same thing now again, we'd obviously do better, you see.
Yeah.
No, we wouldn't, because you'd be saying I told you that.
But I mean, it was natural enough.
Yes.
I mean, I served Mass,
I forgot about that now, I remember.
In fact, both of us served for the...
We've shown you much of the celebrations of Carriganima National School. We have spoken to many of the people involved and many of the past pupils, but there were a number who for various reasons were not able to attend. One of these people is a man who's with me now, Father John Buckley, who's administering in the Diocese of Westminster in England. John, you would have liked to be around?
Yes, James. I really did plan to be here actually last June for the celebrations, but a number of matters arose, and I decided that I just wouldn't be able to make it after all, and to my disappointment, I didn't.
Right. But you attended the school and you have memories of attending there?
Absolutely, yes.
What are your first memories?
Well, my first memories really date back to the event itself of my going there, the very first day I was there, and being taken there by my father in the horse and cart to the creamery, and then back to the school itself. That's a very clear and distinct memory that I have in my mind.
Do you think you liked going to school?
I'm not so sure. I think the answer really is yes and no. One didn't have any choice in the matter anyway. One had to go to school, and that was it, really. I suppose one liked it as well, but only up to a point. One liked the companionship and the friendship and playing with the other boys and so on and so forth.
You played a lot of football?
Yes. Football was certainly part and parcel of my early school experiences in Carriganima.
Where do we get the football?
We got the football from the curate. I'm certain that it was he, Father Burns, who brought a football, a size 4 football, to the school. And we began to play this football with great enthusiasm, if not with great skill, because I certainly remember the strong tendency of all the boys to chase the one ball, so to speak, and with a half a dozen or even more people going for the one ball, you can imagine the kind of tussles which ensued. In fact, I can still remember the kicks on my shin bones. In fact, the marks are still clearly evident to an observer.
Well, in the schoolyard, football was played.
In the schoolyard, which tended to be very mucky, actually.
Yes.
As you know yourself, it was a very confined area, the schoolyard.
Well, you'll be glad to know it has improved very much since.
That's very good news, indeed. We also played in the fields below the road, across from the school, in both fields. I'm certain we played there, where we had much more space there. And
That would have been in Neddy Welch's field.
in Neddy Welch's fields, yes. We also had some sports there, as I remember, some running and some races there. But obviously that was a very occasional event.
You're now a priest. Does religious studies or religious teaching from national school, would you say, did it have a major bearing on you, or did it influence your mind, or do you remember anything about it?
I'm afraid not as such. I certainly remember the emphasis on religion and the emphasis on catechism. It was a very strong one indeed. Our preparation for confession and communion and confirmation could only be described as thorough. We received a thorough treatment in that area. I certainly remember that. The teachers seem to have had a very grave responsibility here, which they exercised, as is clear, with great emphasis. Also, at that time, the priest was very involved. He would come into the school occasionally and ask the children questions. And this was a very testing experience for the children, as I recall, having to face the priest, who in those days was a figure of great authority, and a figure not just to be respected, but to be feared as well. So we were very much the subjects or the victims of the priest coming into the school and asking us questions.
Who were the other people in your class?
The other people I can remember very clearly. Your brother Martin was in my class. Michael Mccarthy, Jerry O'Leary, Sheila Callahan, Mary Murphy.
From Liscarrigan?
From Liscarrigan, yes.
Right. Thanks very much, John.
Thank you, James.
Another man who's also in the missionary field is Father Jack Roach. He was unable to be present at that particular time because he'd been home earlier for his mother's funeral. But we will now bring you an interview which Michael Scanlon did with Father Jack Roach earlier.